Okay, time for another movie retrospective. I know actually a lot of people have been waiting for this one because when I posted the little thing on Patreon where I tell people like ahead of time what it's going to be, like a couple of people were really excited about it. Like, oh, we've been waiting for this one. So this is Ghost Story from 1981. Now, I feel like this one is kind of like, I don't know if it's so much forgotten, but it's kind of like one that doesn't get brought up a lot. Even when people are talking about like 70s haunted house movies or, you know, kind of ghost story type movies from the 70s and stuff like The Changeling and, you know, other things of that nature, which this movie actually kind of resembles.
Yeah, kind of like more like The Changeling, I'd probably say.
Yeah.
I remember seeing it when I was a kid and not really liking it. You know
well, it's the thing about it is that I think that you would probably, okay, I'm going to say that probably you would like it better if you hadn't read the book. Although that's not always the case, because apparently Roger Ebert really liked the movie, and he thought the movie was better than the book, even though I think he might possibly be high, but or might have been at the time. Because I just, like, in preparation for this review, I've actually watched the movie twice very recently, and I reread the novel, so, you know, that's what I do for you.
I think I didn't like it because I think the movie was trying to appeal to an older audience back in 1981.
Well,
it was supposed to be kind of like a serious, slow burn movie. And in 81, it wasn't what I was interested in. I was more into stuff that ended up being more like Poltergeist. And, you know, a little more fast-paced, kind of fluffier movies, you know what I mean, where they weren't so heavy. This movie was kind of heavy for me. In 81. Yeah,
I do feel like it was definitely going for, you know, kind of a more literary, maybe not even literary, but, you know, because I feel like Peter Straub's novel that it was based on is kind of considered, he's like a bit more literary Stephen King. And even though the book was a bestseller and there was like a lot of, you know, similar type of movies coming out at the time, but, you know, maybe that was, I mean, it did make money, this movie, but, I feel like even at the time, the critic reviews were kind of like mixed, or a lot of them were kind of negative. Like a lot of them thought it was really not that good or not that great.
I was talking about how I remembered reacting to it back in 81.
Yeah.
I didn't like it back in 81. You know what I mean? But, you know, seeing it again more recently, I liked it more.
Yeah, this is definitely one because most of the main characters in this are elderly, which you don't see a lot. So that's why in that way it kind of reminded me of The Changeling a little, just because George C. Scott was kind of at the center of that.
I saw that when I was a kid, though. There was something about that one that was compelling. And I think it was because George C. Scott is just such a damn powerful force in that movie, you know. And I'd grown up seeing him in Patton and everything. He just pulled me right into that story. One, but that story's a lot simpler in a way, though. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's kind of linear. You know, just this one is a little more, like you said, more literary.
Well, and the thing about it is that it's ironic because since I just reread the novel, I kind of want to like talk a little bit, or maybe talk a lot about how the differences between the novel, because this is a lot different. I would call this a loose adaptation because so much of the book was left out, and you know it just went in kind of a different direction with things. But yeah, the basic bones of the story is that it's set in a town called Milburn, which I believe is a fictional town. In the movie, it's in Vermont. In the book, it was actually in upstate New York near Binghamton, but it doesn't really matter in the context of the movie. So there's this kind of group of old guys, and they're called the Chowder Society. And they are played in the movie by Fred Astaire. Yes, that Fred Astaire. Melvin Douglas, who was actually also in The Changeling. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and John Houseman. Now, these are the four main old guys, and they are just like, you know, they're very successful. It's like one of them's a lawyer, one of them owns a business, one of them's like the mayor and all this other kind of stuff. But they've been getting together and telling ghost stories to one another. And that's kind of like how the beginning of the movie, like that's how the movie begins. Like they're all like gathered at one of them's houses. They dress up in their little dinner jackets and tuxedos and stuff like once a month or whatever it is. And they come and they have like cigars and brandy and do like old dude stuff, you know. And they sit around telling ghost stories and it kind of passes around. Now, it comes to, like, what ends up happening is that one of the members of the Chowder Society, Edward Wanderley, his son, or one of his sons, rather, David, is killed in New York City. And they kind of show a scene of this where David is like, he's gotten out of bed and there's like a naked woman in the bed with him, and he's like asking her, who are you? Who are you? And she keeps saying, you know. And then he says, what are you? And she says, I am you. And it's like this creepy thing. And then she turns over and she's like a corpse, and he like freaks out and he falls out the window and dies. Now, him dying spurs Edward Wanderley to call David's twin brother, Don, who is also played by Craig Wasson, who you probably recognize from, he was in Body Double, and he was in Nightmare on Elm Street 3, I think. Yeah, Dream Warriors. Yeah, he was in that. So he plays both the twins. So after David is killed, they think he either fell or committed suicide. So Don gets called back to Melbourne for the funeral. Now, while he's there, his dad, and this is different from the book, but I'll get into that. His dad, Edward, also ostensibly commits suicide by jumping off a bridge in Melbourne. However, the audience knows that the reason that he fell off the bridge was because he thought he saw the ghost of David, like, walking through the town, and then he follows it, and then when he gets to the bridge, he turns around, and there's this really fucked up looking female spirit, and it scares him, and he falls off the bridge. So at this point, Don and the Chowder Society are kind of starting to compare notes. And it turns out that the woman that David was in a relationship with that made him like fall out the window had actually prior to that been in a relationship with Don. And Don thought there was something the matter with her. He doesn't, it's a lot clearer in the book, but he's basically saying, that she was, I don't think he called her a witch, but it was something like that. Like, that he just said there's something wrong with her. It's like when you touch her, she's like a corpse, or, you know, she's like really cold and she's really weird. She does like all these weird, like she would start like standing by the window in the middle of the night naked, and then she would say like creepy shit, like, you know, she would just like sleepwalk, and she would say creepy shit to him all the time about how I'll drain the life out of you and all this other kind of stuff. So he was understandably a bit wigged out by this, so he broke up with her, and then she sort of engineered it so that she went to New York and got in with his brother, and that's how his brother ended up dying. Now, as it goes on, like I said, Don and the Chowder Society start, like, kind of fucked up shit starts happening around the town, like, you know, people dying and, like, seeing ghosts and stuff. And it turns out that the Chowder Society killed a girl, sort of accidentally, back in 1929, whose name was Eva Galley. And they were kind of like, they were all trying to dance with her, and she was like being weird, and then like they just knocked her over and she like hit her head on the thing. And they didn't want to, like, they were all in their 20s, so they didn't want to like ruin their lives or whatnot, so they just like popped her ass in a car and pushed the car to the bottom of a pond. But while the car was going into the pond, she woke up, like she was still alive, and she was like freaking out. So they determined that Eva Galley from 1929 is basically like a revenant. And this revenant has come back into the lives of the Chowder Society through the son of Edward Wanderley. So, because he knows her as Alma Mobley. It's the same woman. That was one of the things that made him like think that, was that he saw a photograph of the four of them, like back in the 20s, and she's in the picture, and he's like, yeah, that's her. That was the girl that I was dating. So it is, so like I said, it was a couple of them die and all this other kind of shit, but it turns out that once they pull the car out and get the body out and everything like that, like everything works out okay in the end. Now, it's actually kind of a cool movie. It's pretty much like a straight ahead ghost story. It's a revenant story. Like I said, you don't find out until later on that these four old guys, like, accidentally on purpose kind of, manslaughtered this girl and then covered it up. And that, so she's like acting as a revenant, like she comes back as somebody else, like under a different name, even though she looks the same and it's many years later.
It was kind of creepy when they pulled the car out of there.
Yeah, and like I should say that there's like, this has like a lot of really cool effects in it. I really like, it's set, you know, in the wintertime, like in New England, and everything's snowy, like it looks like a Christmas card, and it looks like just this pretty little town. And a lot of that was matte paintings, which I don't know if a lot of you know, but even like I think the shots of like her old house, like Eva Galli's old house, which is like a ruin and stuff, I think that was a matte painting too, which is kind of amazing, which I didn't know. And then I was watching it again today. I'm like, holy crap. But yeah, a lot of the scenes of Milburn and stuff, I mean, they did film it. I think they filmed it in Woodstock, Vermont, except for the scenes in, it's supposed to be, like I said, in the book it's different, but in the movie, Don was a teacher like at a Florida college, and they actually filmed that at Stetson University, which is in DeLand, which is only a few miles from here, maybe about 20 miles from here. So they filmed that stuff there. So like I said, this is basically a straight up Revenant story. It's pretty cool looking. They actually got a British director, John Irvin. He had never really done horror before, except for maybe like, I think it was like a haunted house movie, like for the BBC or something. So it was like a TV movie. He did stuff like action movies. He did like Hamburger Hill, Soldier, Sailor, Tinker, Spy. He did like stuff like that. And then I think later on he did like some kind of more action movies, maybe with like Schwarzenegger or something like that, if I'm remembering correctly. So I don't know if he was necessarily the best choice to do this movie. And I will say too that the screenwriter, his last name was Cohen, I think, and they got this particular screenwriter because this guy had adapted a shit ton of Stephen King novels. He did Carrie from 1976. He wrote the screenplay for that. He did Tommyknockers. He did the original It, you know, the one that was like the miniseries. So he wrote the screenplay for that. Now, he wrote the screenplay for this, and I'm going to say that Ghost Story, the novel, I don't know if there's any way, and I like this movie, I do, but it's a different animal than the book. And I'm going to say right here that I don't know if you could make a successful adaptation of this book and it be a single movie. This is one that needs a series. You know what I mean? Because check it out, like what they did in the movie was they basically made it just a traditional ghost story. Here's the Chowder Society, here's this younger guy. They, you know, all this creepy shit starts happening to them, and they find out that it's this same woman who they killed back in 1929, and she's a revenant, basically. Now, in the book, it's a lot more complicated than that. She's actually not, she was never a woman. She's not a woman. She's essentially a shape-shifting demon.
Yeah.
A couple times they make a reference to like a Manitou, like the Native American type thing. So she's almost like an elemental spirit that has been around forever. And a couple of things she says like hint around that, you know, all the other monsters like werewolves, vampires, that kind of shit, they're all based on this same thing. This thing that she is.
Yeah.
So like I said, she's a shapeshifter. So in the book, it takes them way longer to figure out that this is all the same woman, because she has like a lot more incarnations like in the book than she does in the movie. In the movie, it's basically like, hey, she was a real woman, they killed her, then she came back as a ghost, like in another form. But
Sounds like this would have made a good Netflix
but it's like
series.
Yeah, in the book, she goes under a whole bunch of different names, and it's like she always looks different. Like in the movie, they knew it was the same one because they saw the picture, and he's like, hey, that's my girlfriend, like my ex-girlfriend, and she looks just like that woman from back then. So, yeah, what are the odds of that? But this, she looks different every time. Sometimes she's a little girl. Sometimes she's a blonde. You know, sometimes she has dark hair. Sometimes she has green eyes. Sometimes, and the only way that you know that it's her, like the original form that she was in, I mean, all the stuff with the Chowder Society, like where they accidentally killed her and stuff, that did happen, but she wasn't a person then either. She was just, that was like her current incarnation, and they killed her in that, and she got pissed off, so then she kept appearing in all these other forms. Now her original form, like I said, just like in the movie, was Eva Galli, but then later on, every single incarnation, she always had the same initials: Alma Mobley, Anne Marie something, or Anna Veronica Moore, I think was one of her names.
It sounds more like the Peter Straub books that I remember reading.
Yeah, and
you know what I mean? Because the movie didn't really seem like Peter Straub that I read.
And I think that's a big criticism that a lot of people had of it, is that, look, I understand if you're making, a 2-hour movie out of a 600-page novel, you got to cut a lot of shit out. But even the screenwriter on this, like I said, this was the same screenwriter that did Carrie, and so he was used to adapting these types of novels, because Straub and Stephen King, their styles are very similar.
Yeah.
So they collaborated a couple times, so like on The Talisman and stuff like that.
I love that book.
I know, and you can't really tell the difference between the two styles, because the styles are very... Peter Straub is a little bit... he's an American, but he lived in the UK for a long time, so he has a little more of a British diction kind of thing going.
Imagine if they did a Netflix series of The Talisman. That shit would be off the chain.
That's what I would like.
That'd be awesome.
I would like to see that.
The werewolf boy and everything, and the weird parallel dimensions, and drinking the magic juice to get you to slip over to the other side. That would be
amazing, actually. Yeah. And you'd think they would. They seem like they're doing that type of thing. Because, look, they did, like, some Neil Gaiman stuff, like American Gods and all that kind of stuff. They made them into a series.
That and a better version of The Stand.
I would really like to see a good version of The Stand.
Version of The Stand. The TV version of The Stand wasn't bad. It's just that it doesn't hold up. I went back and saw it
You could do so much
recently.
better nowadays.
Yeah, I went back and tried to watch it again recently. And it was kind of unwatchable. It looked really tacky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It didn't date very well.
It didn't date well at all.
And, like I said, and I really like this movie. I've always liked Ghost Story. Like I said, a lot of people didn't, particularly if they really liked the book. I actually did always like this movie. I like the look of it. And they even, when it came out, in 1981, it came out, the week before Christmas. Because they were really pulling for, we want it to come out around Christmas time just because of the setting of it, and it's all snowy, and they wanted it to come out. So they successfully did that. And I love the kind of, the whole frame of it being a ghost story and all these old guys, telling ghost stories. But see, the thing about it is that I think what the movie, among many things, what the movie might have lost from the book was that Peter Straub... he actually got the idea for this book from reading Salem's Lot. And in its structure, the book Ghost Story is very much like Salem's Lot. It's kind of about a small town where this supernatural evil comes into it, and then the whole town kind of implodes, and there's a spooky old house, and there's a group of guys that come together with a younger teenager to fight against the evil and stuff. So in that way it's very similar, but Peter Straub has even said that reading Salem's Lot, he's I want to do something like that, that's where he wanted to kind of almost make a comment about it's almost like a meta horror, because he's got this frame of these old guys telling ghost stories. But then he wanted to take actual, old literary ghost stories, by Nathaniel Hawthorne and, Edith Wharton and stuff like that. And he wanted to kind of, reflect them back, I guess, and, into this big, huge story. And at the center of it, he wanted, this female demon that was, at the heart of every single mythic creature, or ghost story. So it's almost kind of like he was trying to do something like that. And like I said, in the book, she's not only not a human, but the whole town is affected. Dozens and dozens and dozens of people in this town die. It's not just these 4 guys and the younger guy, you know what I mean? In the movie. And like I said, I can see why they needed to streamline it for, otherwise this movie would have been 12 hours long to get all the stuff in there, because the book is super complicated. There's all kind of shit going on. The thing I think that's weird about the movie, though, it's weird because they cut so much out of it, but I question the decision of leaving in Eva/Alma's little supernatural sidekicks, Gregory and Fenny. The guy and the little barefoot kid. Now in the movie, they made them, it's they escaped from a mental asylum or something like that. Now in the book, they had actually been real people at one time in the distant past, but had been kind of turned into monsters and turned into her little henchmen. So they were not really human either. Like, a lot of times they were sort of like werewolves or sort of like vampires in the sense they like killed cattle, they like killed people, slashed their throats and drank their blood and things like that. But I don't know why they left them in the movie, because since she was just a revenant, like a ghost in the movie, they didn't really need to be there.
Well, they edited it the hell out of it, and they probably said, well, look how much got taken out of The Shining and what an awesome movie that is. We can do something like that too and get by, you know. But, you know, you're talking about Kubrick. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the thing.
It's big difference, you know.
And like I said, I think that I do think that this movie is a good movie. I don't think it's like the best, like, creepy movie from I do think, like, the effects, like, particularly the corpse effects, like when they show her a couple of times and she's all fucked up and, you know, looks like a bloated, like, watery blah. It's like, that looks really awesome. Particularly the one scene before Edward Wanderley, like, falls off the bridge and he just, like, turns around and it's like, ba-da! And there's this big horrible face and stuff. I mean, the effects in it are really good. Like, the atmosphere of it is really good. The woman that plays Eva/Alma, who I think her name is Alice Kriege, I guess that's how you pronounce her last name. I think she was the Borg Queen in one of the Star Trek, you know what I mean? Yeah. She hasn't been in a shit ton of stuff, and I kind of feel like maybe her being in this movie might have, like, stalled her career a bit.
This wasn't a bad movie, though.
No, it wasn't, but it wasn't like real well received, and it didn't make a shit ton of money. I don't think it lost money, or it might have just broken even.
It was just a different type of story. It's not the kind of story that makes a lot of money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, when you look, even if you were to execute this movie perfectly, it just wouldn't be a blockbuster.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems really strange to me that they thought maybe they were thinking of, like, The Changeling, which, as far as I know, which was, like, a fairly big success.
Yeah, that was a very inexpensive movie, I think, to do. The only thing they did is build that house, that set. That's
what I mean. Yeah, so that might have been more successful
George
just
C.
because
Scott carried that movie. That movie kicked ass because of him.
And I mean, this movie, I think, cost a lot more than that. I think Ghost Story cost about $13 million. Because they shot on location in New York City, they shot on location in Woodstock, Vermont, they shot on location in Florida, they shot in Saratoga, New York, and the Eva Galley's old house, they built that on a set. They did a bunch of matte paintings. There was a bunch of special effects. So had they gone the Changeling route and made it, like, you know, lower budget, maybe it would have been more successful.
Yeah.
But I do kind of feel like I'm just kind of conflicted, because I do like the movie as it is, and like I said, Alice Kriege is really good. She's, like, really super creepy as that character, which is kind of the way I always pictured her when I read the book. But I feel like if you were going to streamline it to that way, maybe they should have gone in a different direction with it, and maybe they should have got a director that was more versed in horror. That's
what I would have done. You could have taken all the crazy stuff out of that book that you were telling me about, put a different tone on it, like the tone of Evil Dead, and make this thing over the top, ratchet it up. Probably would have done pretty well.
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't go as far as doing, like, Evil Dead, because it's not, like, funny. It's not comedic or anything. But there is a lot of crazy shit that happens in this book. Like I said, she's like a demon. There's all kind of creepy shit going on. There's cattle mutilations. There's werewolf type stuff.
What if they did it more like Funhouse?
Yeah, it could be like that. Like I said, I think it would be better. God, this is, like, really hard to say, because it, in tone, like I said, it's very much like Salem's Lot. It's kind of a wide ranging. I think it needs, it needs the form of, like, a series, so it has, like, more room to breathe. Because there's, like, zillions of, like, subplots and, like, all these different characters and stuff, and it's like everything kind of relates to one another, but you don't have time to tell everyone's story in, like, a 2-hour movie.
Salem's Lot's still cool. I bought that thing. I got it on DVD, but I think they have a Blu-ray version coming out. Wasn't that a Blu-ray steelbook that we saw?
I think we did see a steelbook of that, actually, the other day in FYE.
That might be quite cool, yeah.
That was the one we were trying to remember the other day, because I said, what was that movie that we saw the steelbook of that we wanted to buy? But yeah, I mean, if you haven't seen Ghost Story and you haven't read the novel, then you will probably like it a lot more. I like it, but they're really two different things. I mean, it's like the loosest of loose adaptations. They took like one. It was almost like the novel is like this, like this little rug, and they took like one little hank of thread and then just like made a movie out of that, and then they just left all of this other stuff out. Because I mean, there's like scenes. There's a whole thing about like a creepy guy named Dr. Rabbitfoot and like his like creepy jazz band. There's a whole thing about a movie theater in town that's playing Night of the Living Dead over and over, even though there's nobody in there, and there's like shit coming out of the screen, and there's just kind of all kind of crazy shit. And then there's like a whole frame story about one of the characters kind of kidnapping one of the demon's incarnations, who's like a little girl named Angie, and like taking her across the country, and like how weird she is and all this other kind of stuff. So there's just so much left out of that. And I think it's kind of like a shame. I almost feel like if they were going to make the movie Ghost Story, like almost make it like that, but don't even like say that it's based on the Peter Straub. You know what I mean? It's like change people's names, because the whole thing about, even the whole thing in the movie, like about Edward, one, they left like one of the old guys out. There was actually 5 of them in the book. One was named Louis Benedict, and they left him out of the movie. He wasn't even in there. They also left out like a really major character who was like a teenager, and his name was Peter Barnes. He was one of the ones that like helped them defeat the demon at the end. And so they left him out. And the whole thing about Edward Wanderley, who was the mayor of the town, Don and David were not his sons. They were his nephews, and he barely knew them. Like Don only came to the town because the Chowder Society started to suspect that something was weird going on with the demon, and after Edward died, they called him because he was a horror writer, and they thought that he might have some insight into what was happening, because all this weird shit started happening around town, like the cattle mutilations and stuff. I think that was like the first thing that started to happen. So you know what I mean? So so then you have like these kind of like backwoods dudes being like, they're like Martians, like come to the town and stuff like that. So like I said, the book and I don't think it's not really a difference in tone, because the book is very serious. It's kind of like literary, but there's like a lot of shit going on. And I feel like the movie tried to just take the one main little through, like, the little thread that went through the whole story, and was like, we're just going to make this into the movie, and we're going to try and make it like The Changeling, or we're going to make it like a Prestige, like a horror ghost story. And I think to a small extent they succeeded. I don't think it's as good as The Changeling, but it had some really, really creepy moments. Like like I said, Alice Creed was really good in it. The effects were really good in it. The atmosphere was cool. I really liked like the snowy, like New England town setting. It was like very claustrophobic and cool. But I feel like if you like Stephen King from that era, like if you like Salem's Lot, even if you like The Changeling too, I know that's not Stephen King, but you would probably like this if you haven't seen it. But just keep in mind that if you've read the novel, that it's really hardly anything like that. And they're really two different things.
I hadn't seen it in a long time. I didn't really remember liking it the first time that I saw it. But then we saw it again.
Yeah, it's on Shudder at the moment. It's on Shudder.
And it was good. I didn't have that feelings of nostalgia for it, because I didn't have a real strong connection to it.
Yeah, you didn't have a real strong memory of it from the time, yeah.
If I did, then I probably would have enjoyed it even more. But I definitely liked it better now than I did.
Yeah.
So
I remember liking it a lot when I was a kid. I probably liked The Changeling and The Omen and stuff better, but I remember this one being one that I saw a lot and that I really enjoyed, and I remember really liking like those gross like corpse things and being creeped out by her being, oh, it's the Reverend. Yeah. She's the same woman, even though it's like 50 or 60 years, whatever. But then, like, I think I saw the movie, and then I might have read the book like a year or two later and being like, man, this is like nothing the same. And then when we decided to do this movie, because it just came up on Shudder a couple weeks ago, I said, you know what? I have this novel somewhere. Look at how sad this fucking shit looks. It's like, look, the cover fell off. But yeah, so I have the novel.
Back in the day, you used to see this cover everywhere.
Yeah.
In the 80s, this book sold a lot.
It did. Well, that's
Every
why
high school was filled with those back when we were
that's
kids.
why they wanted to make a movie out of it, because like I said, they were like, the horror movies were doing like big business back then. It was like cha-ching, cha-ching, like especially in the late 70s. And like I said, even ones with like an older protagonist or like more serious ghost stories and stuff were still like making bank.
And it was a different era. I mean, you might have been a high school kid that didn't do your homework, but you sure as hell read those things.
Oh hell yeah!
I read all kinds of stuff.
I did too. Well, that's the thing.
I read all the time, but I think reading's kind of almost like a lost art. I don't think kids really do it. They might read a tablet.
Yeah, well, a lot of people read like ebooks and stuff like that because it's just easier than like toting one around. Yeah, the same. And I was the same like when I was in high school. Man, shit, I read Peter Straub and I read Clive Barker and Stephen King and I had all that shit. I got it all out of the library and I was constantly reading something.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I feel like since there were so many bestsellers and Ghost Story was like a humongous bestseller, so, they were like, I think they paid $1 million like for the rights to make it into a movie. And then I'm not going to say they whiffed it because it's a good movie, but it's really not an adaptation of the book in any meaningful sense. It's really not really the same at all. But it's a good movie on its own merits. And as I said, I think probably that actress's performance is my favorite part of it just because she's so creepy and otherworldly, which I think is really good because that's kind of what she was like in the book. And also, and the corpse effects are pretty cool. And I like how they just kind of threw that in there. And I love how like the 4 old guys are in this. And this was their last movies because most of them died. I think actually Melvin Douglas died before this even came out. But it's kind of nice to see a movie with like 4 old codgers as like the main characters instead of like 20-year-olds all the time, I guess. But I think Fred Astaire was probably the best in this. Out of all the old guys. And like I said, Melvin Douglas was in The Changeling as well. Yeah. And I feel like he was in another horror movie too around this time period, but I can't remember what it is. Oh well. But anyway, so yeah, if you haven't seen Ghost Story, this sort of kind of adaptation of the Peter Straub novel, it's from 1981. You should check it out. You might enjoy it. Who knows? And also I recommend the book, and I recommend most of Peter Straub's other books too. And I can see why they don't make a lot of... I think I was complaining the other day. It's like, why don't they make a lot of adaptations of Peter Straub's work? But then when I was reading this again, I was like, oh yeah, that's why. Because I was like, I don't think this is too hard to make a movie. I wouldn't even know where to start actually in this one. And I kind of admire anybody taking a swing at it, but you're gonna have to like pare it way the fuck down and like take pretty much 550 pages out of the shit and then just like concentrate on that. All right, so that'll do it for this episode of the movie Retrospective. Remember, if you like the show, like, share, subscribe on all your social media. If you would like to financially support the show, you can go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/13o'clockpodcast, or you can go to our blog, 13o'clockpodcast.wordpress.com, and there's a button in the sidebar to a PayPal account where you can give a one-time donation if you would like to do so. And check out our shirts.
Yep.
We screen printed it hot off the screen print press. So yeah, I put a video up for the patrons and I put it on the 13 o'clock Facebook page. They'll be shipping out in a few days. So in a couple of days, all you $20 and up patrons plus the person that won the drawing will be getting your t-shirts. Yeah. All right. So we will see you next time. Bye.